I'm Heather, and this is a Living with Addiction podcast, where I show you how you have more power than you realize when it comes to helping yourself and your child that's struggling with addiction. Hey, everybody. Well, I wish that I was starting a new season on a different note, but this is an episode that I never imagined I would have to do. And it's taken me a long time to record this episode because there's no easy way to share with you that my daughter died, and it doesn't feel right to just move on with my business without sharing what happened. So I've been feeling very stuck. On December 2nd, my daughter Helanna, who most of you heard on my podcast a couple of times, overdosed and died. She was given fentanyl. Initially, I shared about it in my group and on my personal Facebook page, mainly because I just couldn't say it out loud anymore. And it's taken me until now to share about it again. That day, I called my sister that I lived with after I got the news, and she told my family for me. But I had to call Helanna's dad and brother and a few other people myself. And those are the hardest phone calls I've ever made. Once I felt like I had told everybody that I had to tell personally, I posted about it on my Facebook page because I could not even imagine having to tell people for days and months to come as I got in touch with people I don't talk to all of the time that she had died. I just could not say it over and over again. And it felt like it was going to be hanging over my head if I just didn't get the information out to as many people as possible. So posting it seemed like the easiest way to tell everybody without putting myself through other people's reactions as well, because that part is hard. And Helanna's the reason that I do this work. So it's really important to me to share this on my podcast and all of my coaching related social media accounts before I just start moving on with helping people again. I mean, she is the reason that I have this podcast and the reason that I get the honor of supporting so many other parents with their child's addiction. And I know a lot of you felt like you knew Helanna. I got so many beautiful messages about the podcast episode that she was on, or both of the episodes that she was on, and I shared them all with her. And it was just so brave of her to come on there. She just has such a beautiful heart to open herself up like that, just to want to help people. And even though some of you listening to this podcast and I may never talk or meet, we do share a bond. So my loss of Helanna from this world hit some of you really hard. And I'm going to be really honest with you about how I feel as I go through the immense grief of losing my daughter. Sometimes I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Sometimes I don't want to. I don't want to build a life that doesn't include my daughter. I have so much resistance to that right now. People always tell me they think that they couldn't deal with losing their child. They don't think that they're as strong as me. And I used to think that too. I used to think I'm not as strong as these mothers who have lost their kids. I don't think I could do it. I just couldn't imagine living without Helanna. But I'm doing it even though I don't really want to. And I pray that at some point I will feel less resistance to that reality. It's still really hard for me to believe this is my life. I had a huge resistance to the reality that Helanna was in full-blown addiction when it started. I wanted to believe that she was just going through a phase, and now I have an even bigger resistance to the reality that I have to learn to live my life without her. But I want you to know that this is the best version of me recording this podcast right now. So don't think that I'm just able to stay put together all of the time. What you're getting right now from me in this moment is not me falling apart an hour ago, or maybe I'll fall apart an hour from now. If I seem put together right now, don't compare yourself to how I seem right now. because I'm at my best right now. So the information that I'm sharing with you doesn't get lost in my emotions because I didn't go through all of this not to be able to help somebody else with it. It's important for me to come to you calmly and without too much emotion so I can get my message across clearly, so I can help somebody who needs it. And I know that Helanna would want our experience to help someone because, again, she had such a beautiful giving heart and she was so helpful. And she really liked that this work that I was doing was helping people. It's really hard for me to decide where to start this story because all of it seems important. But Helanna lived about 4 hours from me. And on Monday, November 29th, she rented a car and drove up to here to bring her dog to me and my mother. Things were not going so well at her sober living and she needed to move, but there's a lot of places, most places don't take dogs. And there were things happening there that were really triggering to her. And there's more that's to that story, but it's just not an important part of this podcast. But I was really worried about her bringing her dog here because she's her emotional support animal. But it came to the point that I felt like moving out of that unstable environment was more important than anything, and that we'd just figure out the rest later. So we had a really beautiful visit while she was here on Monday. We took a bunch of pictures, thank God, because she's really usually resistant to that. She doesn't let me take a lot of pictures. So I'm so, so grateful that we got to take some beautiful pictures together that night because those were the last pictures that I will ever take with her. We went shopping for her dog and we played air hockey and we visited with family. And it was really, really wonderful. And she spent Monday night here and she left before noon the next day to go see her best friend and spend the night with her on the other coast of Florida. So that was Tuesday. And that afternoon, Tuesday, November 30th, she called me and told me that she had relapsed before she came to my house on Monday and that she couldn't go back to her sober living because of it, because she wouldn't be able to pass a drug test. And I was kind of shocked because she was so full of life when she was here. She didn't seem high to me at all. In looking back, the only thing that I can see is that she kept saying how tired she was while she was visiting, but she just didn't seem tired to me. But saying she was tired is something that she used to do to try to cover up being high. But in this case, like even knowing that she was probably high when she was here, I still couldn't see it. So she couldn't have used very much. I was curious. I asked her how and what she had used, and she said that she had snorted heroin. And this gave me a really false sense of relief and a false sense of security. Hearing that she had snorted it instead of injecting it told me that she didn't plan to keep doing it because it's harder to get off the needle. And it also, I felt like there was less risk of her accidentally overdosing. And I reminded her that her tolerance was really low because she'd been sober and this is the most dangerous time for her, and that she has a really high risk of overdosing. And then I also said, please don't say fuck it because you relapse. Like, don't give up. You've made so much progress. And I just want you to remember that you did not lose all this progress that you've made. I'm here for you. And then the fear hit me. Like I started crying and I said, I don't want to lose you. I just got you back. Please don't keep using. And when I said I didn't want to lose her, I really wasn't thinking about her dying. I didn't worry about that much anymore. I was thinking about losing her to drugs again. Like I just got her back. Her personality was coming out. I didn't want to lose talking to her every day and being able to visit with her and just all the interaction we had because her personality and her zest for life were back. And then I apologized for crying and saying that because I didn't want to make her feel guilty. Like I knew that she felt bad enough. And she said, I want to hear how you feel, Mom. I want you to talk to me. And then she promised me that she would call her sponsor and work out a plan. And I had no idea when we hung up, but that phone call was the last time that I would ever talk to her or hear her voice again other than on recordings. I knew that she had to go back to Boynton Beach Wednesday night for work and that she was planning to stay in a hotel until she could find another sober living to move into. And on Wednesday, December 1st, I wrote down her name and I put it in my God box and asked God to look out for her. We didn't really have a lot of contact that day other than like she texted me to tell me that she got a hotel and that she was going to work that night and she promised she'd stay in touch with me. And we both had this necklace that has an infinity symbol on it and she was wearing hers when she left here Tuesday morning. So on Wednesday morning, I wore mine and I took a picture of it and sent it to her and said, that I was wearing it in support of her. And then I sent her a message that said, I love you, Helanna. No matter what, you're my little Kubi. I called her my little Kubi cuckoo. And I'm proud of all your progress. And relapse doesn't diminish that. And on Thursday, December 2nd, I text her at 9:41 in the morning and said, how are you? And I never got a response. And at 12:49 PM, I called her and then I text her again. She never set up her voicemail, so I couldn't leave a message. And she had read receipts on her text, so I knew she hadn't read the messages. I asked her to please, please call me. Like, if I didn't answer, then text me and tell me that she was okay because she never left voicemails. And God, I wish she did because I would still have them. But I had some calls with clients from 1 to 3, and then I was done for the day. And at 3 o'clock, she still hadn't read my messages and still wasn't answering her phone. And I was really starting to panic. So I text her best friend, and her best friend said she hadn't heard from her. And that really scared both of us because they talked constantly. So she started calling her work and her sponsor and asked her sponsor to go to the hotel and check on her. And thank God that they knew what hotel she was at because I didn't. And around 3:30, I left to drive to a friend's house, and he lives about an hour and a half from me. And that was the longest hour and a half of my life. At first, I drove in total silence. I was just trying to regulate my emotions and my fears. And then I started listening to my own podcast. Because ironically, that day I had posted links to videos and podcast episodes related to fear about your child's addiction and overdosing. And I was not doing that for myself. It just seemed to be coming up a lot lately. And so I thought, well, I'm going to put this list of things together and I'm going to post about it so that, anybody who needs it has it. And so I listened to my own podcast episode about fear that your child would overdose and die. And, I just thought, well, this is me right now. And I'm going to put this episode to the test. And so I listened while I was in that situation. And it still rang true for me. Like it still seemed like good advice. And it might seem weird that I turned to my own podcast for comfort, but I was just trying not to call everybody I knew and get caught up in a panic. So I did it as a way to really distract myself and just get through the drive until hopefully she called me and said that she overslept or something. She was supposed to be to work at 5, and the closer I got to 5, the more I was calling her. And all day when I called her, the ring sounded so weird. It sounded more like when you call a foreign country than a domestic call. And every time I heard that ring, it just made me sick to my stomach because I just kept thinking like, she's dead and her phone knows it and the ring has changed. Like it was just awful to hear. And about 5 minutes after I got to my friends, the police called me. And I knew that they were calling to tell me that she was dead. They said that she had snorted something that they believe must be fentanyl because for the amount that she had snorted and the a manner that she had used, that it shouldn't have killed her. And just about a week ago, that was confirmed by her toxicology results that it was acute fentanyl poisoning, I believe is what they called it. And based on a later conversation with her friend, I believe that she died around 12:30 in the morning. And that's a few minutes after her last text with her best friend. And I was in immediate denial when I got the call from the police. Like, I knew that it was true, but I did not want to know it. And I know that this is horrible, but in my total panic, I wanted it to be somebody else. Like, maybe somebody else was in her room with her and Helanna had left. And since they didn't know what my daughter looked like, they could be mistaking her identity. So I called her sponsor that had found her and I kept saying, did you see her? Are you positive it was her? Can you go look again? And she just kept saying that she knew it was her. So I had to wait 8 days to do her viewing. And that whole time, I kept thinking, when I see that person that they're telling me is Helanna, it won't be her. It just won't be her. And then we'll be able to go find her. But of course, that's not what happened. I just remember being so disappointed when I saw her. Like, I was looking forward to seeing her because I knew I needed the closure. But at the same time, I was so disappointed because one, because it was her, and two, because, what made her was her just wasn't there. And so, other than that disappointment, I just went completely numb. I couldn't cry or anything again. And really, the thing that I just noticed about that call that day and the days after it was how I felt. And it was like I was outside myself watching it all happen. The feeling or the numbness in my body didn't match like the words that were coming out of my mouth. Like, I kept talking about how mad I was. I was pissed, like this was not supposed to be our future, but I couldn't feel it. And then I was talking about how sad and devastated I was, and I couldn't feel that either. And when I called my sister and told her, I could feel her reaction. And I wondered how it was so different than mine. And then I talked to one of my best friends, and it was the same thing. Like, she was crying so hard and so upset. But I could barely cry more than a few tears when we were talking. And I just kept hearing myself say, I think that I'm in shock. And as we go through our kids' addiction and fear that they're going to die, we think that we won't be able to handle it if they do die. And I always thought I would literally die if she died. Like, I've said that before, but I didn't die. So I just kept watching myself, wondering what was wrong with me for not being able to react. And it had to be shock, which I'm really grateful for because now that it's worn off, it's really been a struggle. But what I remain incredibly grateful for and what I keep going back to is my gratitude for the work I've done in my own recovery. Like, I just keep asking myself, like, what if I'd never done this work? Or what if I'd only partly done the work and not been dedicated to a life of growth and change? What if I hadn't healed my relationship with Helanna? Or what if I'd stayed estranged from her for the last 7 years instead of making the best of what was available to me? What if Tuesday, November 30th, when she called me to say she relapsed, I had yelled at her? Or what if I had been understanding on the phone, but then after we got off the phone, I didn't know how to manage my fears, so I lashed out at her in anger? I would forever be living with the regrets of not making those changes in myself and in my life. But instead, I at least have the peace of mind of knowing that my daughter knew how much I loved and supported her, and she didn't have to bear the burden of making me happy. And I have the peace of mind that I got to have a relationship with her, even in active addiction. Like, I made the most of what was available to me. And because of that, I got to be a huge part of the last few precious years that my daughter had left to live on this earth. And I'm sharing this whole timeline of events so you can see how, if I wasn't intentional at every turn, things would be very different for me right now. And maybe it will help you to be more intentional for you and help you focus on yourself when you're dealing with your child's addiction and it feels impossible. If I hadn't done all those things, I'd be so full of guilt and shame and regret about fighting with her the last time I ever talked to her. Because after she called me and told me about her relapse on Tuesday, I got really mad. But I just wrote about it in my journal. I did a thought download and I did an unintentional model. And then I did an intentional model. I wrote it all down. If you want to understand more about models, to know what I'm talking about, I have an episode number 16 called The Self Coaching Model. I highly recommend you listen to it if you haven't. But after I did that thought work, I forgot about it until I happened to see it in a notebook recently. And then it really hit me like, oh my God, if I hadn't done that work and all those yucky, unintentional things that came up for me, all of the anger about her addiction, it stayed on a piece of paper. And I never said any of it to her. It didn't have to come between us. So instead of calling her or texting her and blaming her or accusing her or shaming her or interrogating her, I just kept showing up with love and compassion. Thank God. So, in all of this, I've given myself that gift and I'm giving myself clean pain. I'm in pain because I lost my daughter and I just want her back. That's clean pain. That is more than enough pain without making it worse. Dirty pain would be adding to it. Going through all the what if scenarios, believing I could have stopped it somehow, blaming myself, beating myself up, basically terrorizing myself after I've already experienced the worst possible trauma I can imagine. So I am grateful that I had the skill set to give myself grace, love, and clean pain, and that I did not say any of those things to Helanna, and that I wrote them down and gave myself the chance to be really intentional. And of course, like looking over her whole life, there's going to be things that I have to forgive myself for. But I'm keeping all of those things in perspective. And it doesn't matter where you are in this journey with your child's addiction. You need to do the work for your own healing. You need to do the work that you want your child to do. You've got to heal your emotional wounds and you've got to heal your traumas if you have them. Create that mind body connection so you can tap into your inner wisdom about what's best for you and your family instead of relying on other people. You've got to become the person that you've been looking for to help you. I can't even imagine dealing with my grief about Helanna if I hadn't already healed a lot of my emotional wounds. And this is really important. Everybody needs to do this work. Working on your mental health and your emotional health is as important and necessary as working on your physical health. Many people won't work on themselves, though, and this is why. They only experience intermittent painful triggers to their wounds and traumas. Your trigger, which is your child's addiction, is relentless and ongoing. A child's addiction is a constant trigger to all of your wounds and traumas, and it might let up for brief periods, but it always comes back. And there's a reason that most parents react very similarly to their child's addiction. There's a reason that my program works for everybody who does it, whether they have a child dealing with addiction or they want help with some other area of their life. You, as the parent of a child struggling with addiction, aren't different than any other people in the world. We're all the same, but your trigger is constant and relentless. So you're forced to seek help and make changes in your life if you want relief. Many other parents don't see their issues because the cause of them goes away. It resolves on its own. So then people think the problem is the circumstance rather than their approach to it. They think it's the circumstances or the pain points, like being unemployed or a short-term illness or injury, an affair, money problems, something like that. But it's a problem, but not the problem. All the circumstances I mentioned above, they point a spotlight on a lack of coping skills and emotional wounds, but they generally aren't lifelong issues like addiction, so the trigger goes away. But here's a really important way to look at what I'm saying. If I poke you in the arm and there's no injury there, it doesn't hurt unless I push really hard. Then it still doesn't hurt as much as it would if there was an injury there already. And if there's an existing injury, it's going to hurt more. The bigger the injury is, the more it hurts when I poke you. And some injuries can exist and we don't even know they're there until they get pushed on, right? You ever figure out you have a bruise by touching it? The injuries I'm talking about are traumas and emotional wounds that happen throughout your life and were never resolved. We don't realize they're there until they get poked. And your child's addiction is what's poking the wound. It's not the original wound. And this is where we get confused and try to fix our kids. We see the addiction as the problem, and we only try to fix the addiction. We miss the opportunity to heal our own wounds as well, to heal as a family. You have a wound, but you're trying to fix it by healing your child's wound, by fixing them. That doesn't fix what you're dealing with. That's like putting a cast on my broken arm to heal your broken arm. We both need a cast. You have to work on your wounds, and your child has to work on theirs. Their addiction will continue to poke you, but it will hurt less and less because you are healing, and their addiction will become a lighter poke most of the time. You will also be creating space for them to do their own healing, which is really important. I've been doing this work on myself for years, and that's the same work that I do with my clients. After my daughter died, and I was talking to my clients for the first time, a lot of them mentioned their concerns seemed trivial compared to me losing my daughter to her addiction. I told them not to trivialize what they're working on or what we work on together by comparing it to me losing my daughter. It is so important that we do this work on so called trivial things because life never stops. I've had many challenges this year, and I was able to face them because I worked on all those so called trivial things for years before this. I get a clean conscience and clean pain because of that work. I'm so grateful that I get to just process the grief of losing my daughter without processing the triggering of a bunch of other grief and loss and trauma on top of it because I never processed it. It's not like I'm perfectly healed and there's nothing, but I don't have all those things clouding my grief. I get to honor my daughter and myself with grace and love and let my pain be what it is. And I can see the difference in that. So you have to do the work on yourself. Empower yourself. Learn how to manage yourself and your life instead of needing your child to change so you can feel better. Learn how to create your own better. Know how to create your own better without anybody else needing to change no matter what is happening. And that brings me to where I am today. My brain keeps telling me, like, I have no idea how to do this. Absolutely no idea how to live without my daughter. But that's really not true. I know what to do. I have to keep doing the things that I've been doing to get me through her addiction. Of course, I have a lot of resistance to it. I don't want to create a life without her, and that's very different from not knowing how to. So for now, I'm allowing that resistance. It feels normal that I feel that way, of course, and I trust myself to work through it. So I'm just sitting with how uncomfortable it is. I'm sitting with my resistance and not trying to force myself to do anything different right now. But when I'm ready, I'll use all the tools that I have learned from dealing with Helanna's addiction to create a new life, a new future. Once again, I'm reminded that how I think about my daughter's death and my life without her is the only thing that can bring me relief. How I think about it is the only thing that can bring me relief. I have to be very intentional with how I think about this. While I'm waiting for my resistance to this phase of my life to fade, I'm definitely not going through this alone. So I just want to remind you, like, don't carry the pain of your child's addiction alone. Don't go through it alone. I suffered in silence about my daughter's addiction for a long time. And I know that many of you who are listening are suffering alone in silence too. I haven't gone through my daughter's addiction alone for many years. And because of that, I'm not going through this experience alone either. This experience has really shown me more than ever other people really can help you with carrying the burden of your grief or your pain. Right now, a close friend is on Zoom with me while I work on this podcast. I could not bring myself to sit alone and work on it So she offered to be here on Zoom with me if I needed her. And I went from being overwhelmed about it to feeling like I couldn't face it because it was going to be too hard and too emotional to feeling like maybe I could do it. It was just this instant relief that my friend was willing to do that for me. And now I've got other friends doing it as well. So just having somebody sitting here with me, like on Zoom, we're not even interacting, but it just makes it so much easier for me to be able to sit here and do this work. I'm not doing this alone. I'm being supported. And so many mothers have cried with me through this and shared my pain. Like there were times it just felt like my grief was too overwhelming. I talked about earlier how I couldn't even cry sometimes. And a lot of times I was able to cry because somebody was crying with me. It wasn't so overwhelming anymore. It was like they were helping, they were letting out some of the grief too. It was just so overwhelming. And the only time I could really do that during those first couple of weeks was when somebody cried with me. And that was amazing that I had people in my life that could really do that with me. And another thing was for the first 10 days, somebody slept with me every night. I could not be alone. Well, I could have been alone, but it would have sucked way worse. Nights and mornings were the worst. And that was in the beginning. The nights and the mornings were the worst. I have been able to make sure that I sleep at night now, but the mornings are still very challenging for me. And every morning when I wake up, she's the first thing that I think of. And my heart aches for her. I miss her so much. And every morning, it's like a new thing to go through every day to kind of get myself used to living without her. And I had friends or family here most of December. I have plans to visit more people soon so that I have something to look forward to. I'm taking all of the help that I can get. I am so glad that I don't have to do this alone. And I just want to remind you not to do this alone either. And there's another mom that I know that lost her child because of addiction. And I asked her what helped her. And she said that being with people that she loved was what helped her the most. And I hadn't realized it until she said it, but that's what helped me the most. That's what's been a lifesaver for me. But I have to say yes. I have to say yes to letting people help me. I had to say yes when my friend offered to sit on Zoom with me, and my brain was like, oh, great. Now you need a babysitter to work. Well, my brain was pretty insulting about it. But in my body, my response was, yeah, this is just what I need right now. And this is hard, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get through it. And I'm going to accept this help. So remember that you have to say yes. My last episode on here, the bonus episode, was about how I realized I had to accept help when people offer it. My friends, there was some help that I didn't accept when I was dealing with breast cancer. So, really, the beauty of making that episode was when my friends offered to come out here and help me, I could just say yes. And so they were able to be here the next day. And then I was able to tell people, like, hey, I had so many people offering to come out here. I was able to say, like, okay, I've got a lot of people here right now. Maybe you can come out in January or February, or I can come and see you, and just be open with people about what my needs were. And I've even told everybody that reached out to me, like, keep checking on me. Don't stop checking on me in December. Keep checking on me in January and February and after that. And then I'm honest about how I feel when people do ask me, because if I'm not honest about how I feel, then people are going to think that I'm okay when I'm not. And so I just want to say this again. If you feel alone, if you've been going through this alone or not sharing it with anybody, then make sure that you find somebody to share this with. Do not go through this alone anymore. You do not have to. If Helanna had called her sponsor and spent the night with her instead of going to a hotel, she might be alive today. Even if she had chose to use, somebody would have been there with her. Somebody could have called 911. She didn't call her sponsor, even though she told me she was going to, though. Instead, she was alone, alone when she was the most vulnerable. And connection is a survival skill for us as much as it is for our kids. So build those connections. We have to build those connections no matter how hard it is. Now, I want to switch over to a really important conversation that I had with Helanna a little over a year ago. And when I had this conversation, I was somewhat devastated by it, but now I'm really grateful that I had it. When Helanna was in rehab in Houston, she overdosed and got sent to the hospital from the rehab. And so I drove there to check on her kind of in a panic. And when I got the call, because nobody called me to tell me that she had overdosed, and the hospital called me and she was leaving the hospital, and I was confused. And I was like, I just got to get there. So I drove all night from Florida to Houston. And when I got there to the rehab, she was outside waiting for me and she wanted to leave. Her plan was to ask me for money. Basically, she told me if I didn't give her money to use, if I gave her money to use, she would stay in rehab. She would just go use and then come back. But if I wouldn't give her money, then she was just going to go live on the streets and never come back. And of course, I was not going to give her the money, but I was trying to convince her to stay. And they got a counselor involved. And the counselor said, well, if you're insisting on leaving, I want you to tell your mother what kind of funeral you're going to have. I want you guys to plan your funeral. And so she sat down with me and we planned her funeral. And at the time, it was kind of traumatic. I was like shocked that the counselor even said anything about that or brought it up. But we had the conversation. And as we talked about it, I was like, I don't know where I'm going to live. Like, I've moved so many times in my life. I'm sure that I'm going to continue moving. And I don't want to put you in a cemetery like my dad's in a cemetery in New York, and I never really go there anymore. I can't even tell you how many years it's been since I've been to his grave. And so I said, can I cremate you and put you in an urn so that I can take you with me wherever I go? And she said, yes, I like that idea. And it was a really uncomfortable conversation. And I cried through the whole conversation. But I'm so grateful that I didn't resist it because when I had to make those decisions last week, if I had freaked out and refused to face that conversation, I wouldn't have been able to remember that conversation. It felt like a miracle when that conversation popped into my head when I was trying to figure out what to do. And I'm so lucky that I had shared it with a friend and I could confirm with her that she remembered the same thing that I had. And it made it so much easier to make that decision because that's a decision you never want to have to make. And one of the skills that we need when dealing with our kids' addiction is having the skill set to deal with uncomfortable conversations. That was an uncomfortable conversation, but it was also a lifesaver for me. So keep working on your own recovery so you can have those uncomfortable conversations, hear the ugly truths, talk about things you don't want to talk about. Just be in the moment with your kids, even when it's uncomfortable. Helanna and I talked several times about how you only get one life, one chance to live this life that you're living right now. Don't get help for yourself out of fear. Get help for yourself out of love. I got to read a little bit of her journal, and she was talking about how the key to her recovery was loving herself. And that's the same thing for us. The key to our recovery is loving ourselves. So get whatever help and support you need so that you can live a fuller self, a fuller life. Do it out of love for yourself. Gather all the skills that you can. And the last thing that I want to talk about today is how you connect with your kids. And this is something that's really important to me right now because I'm thinking about how I can remain connected with Helanna. Like, ask yourself, like, what emotion are you connecting to them through? What feeling do you feel the most when you think about your child? That's how you're connecting with them. For a lot of parents, the main feelings are guilt and shame and anger. So that keeps coming up in their relationship no matter what they do. And their relationship is revolving around those feelings. And I've been there too. Like, that's what our relationship used to revolve around. I'm bringing this up though, because I see a lot of grieving parents are staying connected to their kids through that grief. And I feel the same temptation myself. And I don't want Helanna's memory to fade. I don't want the world to forget her. And connecting to her through my pain and grief, an easy default connection to keep her memory alive and to stay connected with her. It's easy for me. But in her life, I made a commitment to connect with her through love above anything else. And I worked really hard to sort through my unintentional feelings of guilt and shame and anger so I could connect with her through love. And I was able to turn our relationship around over a period of several months because of that. And I've shared how several times about how when she got sober, I had to be vulnerable and keep leaning into love, even though I was scared. I'd learned to live without her and had the relationship with her that she was capable of having with me in active addiction. And I was scared to open up to her and make her a part of my everyday life again with, the possibility of losing her. I don't regret it for a second, though. I have been so grateful that I went all in on our relationship. And there is no way that it would hurt less if I had held back. I would have regrets. Like, going all in on that relationship is what was right for me and what was right for her. So I'm going all in on connecting to her through love in her death as well. I don't want a lifelong connection to her through grief and pain. There's always going to be some grief and some pain, of course. And I have a lot of it to process, but overall, I want to focus on connecting to her through love. Like, when something is funny, I laugh really hard still. And I remember all of the times that Helanna and I laughed together, and it was a lot. She was the funniest person I knew. When I feel a glimpse of happiness, I allow it and know in my heart that she wants me to be happy. I believe that I can honor my grief and sadness and also experience joy again. When I'm ready and I stop feeling the resistance to living without Helanna, I'm going to keep connecting to her through joy and love and not grief. I know so many parents that struggle with feeling guilty about enjoying their life when their child is struggling with addiction. And now I see a lot of parents struggling with the guilt of living because their child died from their addiction. So if our kids aren't really living and we aren't really living, or our kids have died from their addiction and we still aren't living, who are we helping? Are we helping anyone that way? If I'm not functioning, then I can't help other parents. I can't figure out who sold my daughter the fentanyl and tell the police. I can't help change the stigma of addiction. My voice will be missing from the really important conversation about fentanyl being the number one killer of people ages 18 to 45. It's mind blowing to me that I just learned this and we're not hearing more about it daily and that nothing is being done to change it. So, as much as I'm struggling right now, I'm trying. I'm feeling the deep grief. I'm crying the tears, doing all the things. I'm being honest and vulnerable and sharing that I'm dealing with really uncomfortable emotions. I'm going to keep connecting to her through love and honoring her with love, though. Connecting to your kids through love is available to you too. It doesn't help anybody to connect to them through guilt and shame. So please take a look at that for yourself. I want to end this episode by saying thank you to everybody for your support and generosity. I received so many amazing messages and such generous support for Helanna's memorial. And the love and the prayers and support I've received have really helped me carry through this. I just can't thank you guys enough for that. And so I am starting season 2 of the podcast. I don't know if I'm not going to be able to do it every week. Just going to say that right now. Right now, I don't think I'm capable of doing it every week, maybe every other week, but I do have a lot to share. And I know that Helanna would want me to be sharing it. And so, I'll be posting again and showing back up because that's what I can do for now. That's how another way that I feel really connected to Helanna in a positive way. So that's all for this week. I will be back soon with a new episode. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it 2 different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.